Look up to the title now. Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Hello. We are Geeks Assembled. And today we are talking a 1940 movie, The Thief of Baghdad. Um, I watched this years and years ago, and I've rewatched it this week. And for the life of me, I always remember it in black and white. And then to watch it again in colour this week, I don't know. I must have watched it on a black and white set
Mhm.
back in the day. But and I was surprised about it. It's a British movie. It's not Hollywood. It's a British movie. So let's go over to Susan and Alex and their opening thoughts of The Thief of Baghdad.
Yeah, I know that, depending on the studio and depending on the budget, they could always have it in color or um, other effects. But unfortunately, when I was a kid in the 70s and the 80s, plus we had a black and white television set because still color TVs were a little bit expensive. And also, it depended on what the local stations in Cambridge or Boston or Springfield were willing to pay in bulk for movies that they showed overnight sometimes, 6 in the morning on the weekends, maybe. Saturday afternoons, we had a Cambridge station that I've mentioned many times played British stuff on the overnight from like midnight to 6 in the morning. But then on Saturday afternoon would show creature double feature with a very memorable music and then play a kung fu movie. So it's also very funny in terms of not only the rights, the clearances, what you have to pay for a movie, but I don't remember even 40 movies that they didn't have in black and white because I think the color was very expensive. Um, this was a very weird movie to start with. Oh, I think that's Anne knocking up.
Okay, I enjoyed this movie. It was sort of a story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. It was sort of a story of Aladdin, the Prince of Thieves. And it was sort of a story of Aladdin and the lamp. And it was also a story of uh, the 40, no, the Arabian Nights.
Also, Sinbad got a mention as well.
Oh, and also Sinbad, yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, this story had, parts of it coming from all the different directions, and so I enjoyed trying to sort out where those other directions were. And I love the fact that it was like emotionally relevant, and I mean the love story between um, the two leads, uh, what's his name, Prince, no,
Prince
sorry, Prince Ahmed and or King Ahmed and the princess were um, it was rich. It was quite interesting.
Mm.
Anyway,
It was also it was sort of a friendship movie as well
yeah,
with Abu and the Prince.
Abu and the Prince, right?
Yeah. Um, carry on, Susan. Yeah.
No, we can do open discussion, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because it was like it was a romance between the prince and the princess, but also it was the developing friendship of Abu and the prince that
right.
would go many years after the evil Jafar. I wonder where Disney got that from. Um, to making him blind and Abu into a dog, and they've been traveling together for how many years?
Yeah,
But I think the performance in this was brilliant. I mean, okay, it's supposed to be set in where was it, Arabia or somewhere like that. but you the two leads are all proper English speaking. But it's of its day, isn't it? I mean,
And everybody was speaking like Hindi or something, not actually speaking
well, this is it. I mean,
Arabic or
you
even
get all the crowd scenes, and you do get all the Arabic, all those people there, the proper people what should be in the movie. But then the leads are all white English males and females
yeah,
speaking
it's true.
proper English of the day. Uh,
Yes.
but it didn't, for me, it didn't take away the enjoyment of the movie.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. But anyways, back to you.
Yeah. I mean, again, and you also have, a lot of actors that sort of became famous or infamous. I guess this won a few Emmys, no, I should say Oscars awards because of the flying carpet does look realistic for the 1940s. It has great costumes. Even the effects with the genie was pretty good. I like the dialogue and I like the way the movie looks. As far as the acting maybe not. It does move all over the place. I mean, it was like they were trying to cover all the myths, I guess, all the legends of and it does let down a little bit. But considering the dialogue, considering that they sort of turned it into a little bit of a soap opera toward the end, um, but at the same point, it wasn't a horrible movie that you go, oh, I give up or whatever. But you definitely have to be in the mood to see something pretty and say, well, I don't really care if it doesn't follow, a straight line per se. They did try to tie it up. Again, it's interesting because 1940 cinema, American and English, was very interesting, and they sort of blended off each other and worked off each other as well. It is a little stereotypical, just a little bit. But again, were they expecting this movie to be watched, what, another 50 years later or whatever? Probably not. It did make some of its money back. Um, it did win some awards for the costume and the way it looked and all that. So yeah, it's not bad. Could it have been better? Could they have done better special effects or better pacing or maybe better? It could have flowed a little bit better, connected a little better. Yes, but again, it's the 1940s. It's an enjoyable movie. It looks nice. Definitely has a plot. It definitely has a lot of dialogue.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if this had been made in the '60s, it definitely would have been different. It definitely would have been more James Bondian or Tarzan like, and it might have taken away from some of the enjoyment of the movie. It might have been too gimmicky, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. The special effects were brilliant. I mean, it was 1940. The effects in this, I mean, the flying carpet, the mechanical flying horse, brilliantly done.
Yeah.
Even every now and again, the genie was a bit iffy, especially when he was stood on his shoulders, holding onto his hair. You could tell, but the flying genie, brilliant. I mean, the set as well. They put a lot of money, building those sets. I mean, I'm assuming they built the sets, or they might have used proper buildings what were already there in wherever they filmed it. I don't know, but the sceneries were brilliant.
I think it might have been in Arizona partially.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But like I said, for people that really watch movies of different decades, you can see decade by decade how it progresses from the 1920s to 1930, 40, 50. Then it changes a lot again in the 60s. And then it changes again in the 70s and the 80s. And the nice thing is, it was a very interesting movie to look at. And you didn't have any CGI, you didn't have almost any computer because they weren't invented back then.
no, that's it. It didn't exist.
Yeah, so you have, well, yeah, but it was also more in theory still. But again, it had some amazing camera tricks if you really think about it. So it's as I consider myself an unpaid movie critic, an authorized film buff, and all that, visually it's very good to look at. Whereas in the 1930s, you would have had basically just the desert, a little bit of swashing of the swords and the clothes, and that would have probably, and maybe the ocean, and
Yeah,
that would have been about it. So they made huge leaps that really 20 years later you only needed to polish it a little bit and it still would have been very good. And it's sort of, who knows how many people on the internet did watch movies from the 30s and 40s and could have been, inspired to change or to work those ideas in as well.
yeah.
I mean,
I
yeah.
I mean, I like it when we delve back in time and watch these sort of, what we call it, was it classic movies from that era, because it's like a breath of fresh air when you watch these sort of movies compared to what we get these days. But say FIFA Baghdad, yeah, I mean, as you said, some of the acting, yeah. Sabu, he was on the top of his game around about then, playing Abu. Um, Everybody knows him as the Elephant Boy. Then you had, was it Conrad Witt, the German actor playing Jafar? He worked in silent movies, moved into sound movies. He's well known for The Man Who Laughed and is it The Hands of Orlak and stuff like that, and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. But and only 4 years after this, he'd passed away. But he made a brilliant villain. The way he looked in his eyes, just brilliant as Jafar. And as I say, the mechanical horse scene was just absolutely done perfectly. And also the scene with I can't remember the name of the goddess with the many arms. I can't remember the name of that goddess.
Oh.
But that scene was really well done. But you could see that there was arms in the chair behind her, but every now and again. But it still, for its time, looks okay. It's passable. So, any favourite moments from you two, or things what you didn't like?
Yeah, I guess my favorite moment was when the princess and the king were face to face, and he was sharing how much he loved her. He loved her today. He loved her tomorrow. He loved her forever. I mean, that was really beautiful, and I liked the part where Jafar was um, sort of controlling things and masterminding this separation, and then eventually, to woo her and marry her, and basically to run the course of all of his known world anyway. He was a good magician, and so that was fun. And he was a good baddie. He was one that you could get behind properly. And I'm slowing down sort of a lot because I just took a second Benadryl, and I'm getting so slow. Anyway, here's Alex.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the other thing that people forget nowadays with how demanding, movies are and how much money they have to make and all that, is that if this movie had failed in the dialogue, if it had failed in the visual, if it had failed in the characters, or if the characters had looked like they were made out of cardboard, it definitely would have lost the impact. Now, of course, there wasn't a lot of women in this movie, and they could have been a lot stronger. But again, this is the 1940s. And they didn't have the super everybody's equal or better than type of.
1970s.
Yeah, it was not the type of ambiance back then. But again, this could have been a lot worse. Visually, it still looks very good. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to make a $500 trillion or whatever to have an enjoyable movie and have it look good. Yeah, like I said, it was a little hammy at times. It was a little over the top. They did try to put in, what felt like 15 different stories. But again, they could have done this as a cartoon. They could have done a different style, and it definitely would have lessened the effect. Considering that this is one of the famous movies until the 60s or the 70s rolled along with a little different cast and a different studio and things, that's the other piece probably to keep in mind is that they did, the genres have always been around. You've always had a drama or comedy or horror or science fiction. And as the decades and the studios, try their different ideas, it usually gets better unless you're picking a very bad movie or a movie that runs out of money or whatever. It usually can improve. And this was pretty good considering that they didn't have any computers or things like that. Visually, it's very good. It's not too corny. Yeah, it's not too corny. The colors are great. The costumes are great. There's only a few other movies that can beat this movie, and one of those is a cartoon, which unfortunately they've redone again, which they didn't need to do. So that's the other issue as well. That's fun in terms of watching older movies is that they didn't need to remake the same thing a billion times, and they usually tried to add something really new to it. Whereas now it's just redoing the exact same thing, only with a bigger budget, which is not always a good idea.
Well, the 1940 version, what we're talking about, is a remake of a silent
Right,
version.
from 1928 or whatever, right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I could be wrong in that respect, but what I mean to say is the original version from the 20s was actually longer than this version. So in some ways it was better. But again, it depends. It depends on, people forget, just like a TV show, there's many different things that many different elements. You have to have, the sets can't look too cheap. The dialogue and the acting has to be somewhat realistic, that you're not laughing or crying too much. The pacing has to be good. The direction has to be good. The editing, the music in this is pretty good as well. So I think people forget that you have to have all those elements working together. Otherwise, you either have a bad movie or you have a really cheap movie that looks terrible. So I think people forget because we have everything in 10-second, access and 10 billion videos. That back in those days and back before the 2000s, you couldn't see 10 billion things unless you were going to every movie theater in your local town. And not everything was good, or not every version, or not, I went to movie theaters in the 70s or the 80s where the sound was deafening and you couldn't enjoy the movie, or the film got damaged, or they used a version of the film that was already damaged, where you saw all these little hairs and all these little dots and all that. So I think people forget the old days, just like a VCR where you see all that snow and all that interference and and all that. Yeah. So I think we've gotten very spoiled in the sense that everything looks so wonderful and everything's a millisecond, whereas in the old days it wasn't like that. In the old days of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 90s, if something went wrong, or if a station had to interrupt something, or everything just stopped.
Yeah.
You couldn't go to, oh, I'll save it on the internet for later, or I'll buy a DVD and watch the movie, in perfect quality, and the tape won't break, or whatever. And I think people forget that in the olden days you actually had to be there, or you had to go to a special place or you had to be by the telephone. And if you weren't, you missed the call. So I think people forget how much digital, has changed. And this isn't digital, but it still looks very good. It's got
Oh
beautiful,
yeah.
you
The
know, yeah.
color is brilliant in this.
Right, and that's why they had Technicolor, so you could
Yeah.
watch, Gone with the Wind and Singing in the Rain and other with this beautiful, lifelike, you know,
Mm.
colors, and you didn't have to see CinemaScope where everything was slightly out of shape. The fences were too tall, and they even made fun of that on English television. That
Oh,
the old days of the '60s, '70s, and even '80s, where the heads are too tall and the scale is out of focus and the colors are either too dull or too bright and all these other things. So I think people forget that uh, we've come so far in terms of watching things
yeah.
visually. Yeah,
As you say, we have been spoiled.
yeah.
We have been spoiled. I always look forward to watching older movies because I don't know, I enjoy it more.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm an old fart.
Well, the,
Um,
the other the other thing too, Lee, with all due credit and respect too, there was a lot of movies in the '60s that actually were $6 million and
oh
still
yeah,
look very good. Whereas now it seems like a movie has to make 400 million or else.
yeah.
So it's kind of funny how, yes, it's good that things increase, but then you wonder, well, I can watch a movie from, a Michael Caine movie or a Elizabeth Taylor movie, and it still looks very good. It doesn't
Mm,
have to be, 10 billion computers with a staff of 5 million to watch a movie now or in the last 5 years.
mm.
And, yeah.
I mean, also, it was mentioned there isn't many female characters in that. You've got Joan Dupree as the princess. You've also got Mary Morris as Halima. And people who know Mary Morris, she was the only female number two in the cult TV series The Prisoner,
Mm,
and also she appeared in Doctor Who Kinder,
mm,
the old woman. Um, she was a brilliant actress in a day. So it was good. I mean, I didn't realise she was in this until I was rewatching it. I thought, oh, I know that name, so I had to look it up. Yes, Mary Morris, and also the performance of Rex Ingram as the genie.
mm.
That is so brilliantly done.
Yeah. Well,
It-
it's a little OTT. It's a little Brian Blessed, but it was still a good performance.
yeah, but any genie performance is OTT. Just look at Robin Williams in Aladdin.
Well, yes. I mean, pop culture references aside,
Yeah.
but I did watch that. That's the other thing that we haven't mentioned as well, Lee, is that if we saw this on I don't have a 60-inch TV or whatever, I'm sure that if you watch this in the cinema, it's just as good looking as Jason and the Argonauts, which
Oh yeah,
we have,
yeah, yeah.
reviewed as well, with, beautiful, movements of the skeletons coming to life and all that. And my main point is to remember, of course, Lee and I know this, of when you watch a movie and if it's done really good by a studio or it's done really good by a director or an editor that really knows what they're doing,
Mm,
you're in for a super treat. It's very, it really catches your attention. And this is
true.
before the internet. This is before, that's why they show the Ten Commandments every year, Gone with the Wind, or I forgot another movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Is
Yeah.
that, yes, it's corny in a sense of the jaded, supercomputer, super cell phone times that we live in. But considering back then that, you didn't have life in 10 seconds like you do now. And, you didn't have 10 billion choices to watch whatever you want to watch.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, and, how lifelike these movies were and how good the acting. I mean, that's the other issue too, is that even in this movie, you see people change. You see people from the beginning, middle, and the end. And that's the problem nowadays, is that I think they're trying to make the movie so fast or make 10 movies based on this movie that you don't see the beginning, middle, and the end. You don't see a progression, a flow of how the characters change.
I
And
mean,
yeah,
for us, was it a 79-year-old movie?
yeah,
You know, it still stands up today.
yeah,
You know, and for me, I sat through it, just watching it from beginning to end. I didn't get bored.
yeah.
As you say, we've mentioned that, you know, some of the acting can be a bit dubious every now and again, isn't it?
Yep.
You can take that. But I mean, even the scene with the all-seeing eye with the spider and the web. Yeah, it's a bit iffy now, but it still held my attention. I was watching it. I was thinking, oh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? But yeah, I don't know. It's a magical movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, we're still talking about humans here. So the spider web might have looked a little better, but it wouldn't have been completely different.
Yeah.
Because remember, there's too many Spider-Man movies now. So they still would have had the basic idea there.
There's
again,
so many superhero movies now.
Human is human. A pizza's still going to look like a pizza. But it was the fact that it was too small and then too big. If they had kept the scale a little bit more in the middle, it would have been more effective. But the idea still is still there.
Yeah, it did the trick. It did the trick for the movie. For me, for a 79-year-old movie, it still kept my attention. I was watching it. Oh, what's going to happen now?
Yeah, me too.
You know, I wanted to know what was going to happen. So it worked.
Yeah.
Anyways, we've done our sort of our favourite bits here and there, haven't we?
Yeah.
We have, haven't we? We've gone around the block a few times.
Yeah.
So can we do final saying scores?
Sure.
If anybody else can have anything to say about it, or
No. I really enjoyed seeing this. I liked all the references, and I love how they were able to do so much with their special effects, and how they were able to tell a really engaging story about this King Ahmed and his best friend Abu, and I'll give this an 8 out of 10. It was enjoyable. I'll give it 8 genies in the lantern out of 10.
Yeah. Again, they did try to do similar stories in the 70s, and they even did it in the 90s. There was a Sinbad syndicated TV show from Canada. And they had more women characters, so I have to give it that in terms of the 90s. It looks slightly better, but it didn't look as beautiful, and it didn't have as much defined characters. So I guess it's also a trade-off. And then the other thing, too, is that, again, as the movies and the TV shows, decade by decade, follow on, they probably should actually do a new version of this with more characters.
we're mostly due one now, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So notwithstanding the ripoff of the live-action Will Smith and blue paint type of thing, which is a little creepy. Again, it wasn't the best movie, but it did keep my attention. It did flow. They did have character development, not the best, but in terms of the costumes were great. The music was great. Visually, it was very good. And again, this is 40 years before everybody caught up with how the budget's supposed to be and the landscapes and all that. Are there cheesy parts of this movie or parts that they really overdid it? Yeah, there is. Yeah. And I think they put too much into this movie. But again, you have to give them an A for effort. Considering that this is before, the $6 million 60s movies, or you have to have 5 famous people, or if they made it now, it would have to be 4 women and $60 million and things like that now, and a computer team and all this. Maybe they could use this as the inspiration. But considering that this happened before all of that, they didn't do a terrible job. They did a pretty reasonable, if better than reasonable job.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is that decade by decade we usually evolve and get better and get more polished. And for the 1940s, this had a lot of polish on it. It had great music, great visuals, great sets, great scenes of beaches and caves and all that, even flowers too. So considering, and even if they did animation, it was still very well done. So this movie did deserve the awards it got for costume design and sets and things like that. And I think that's part of what you learn in film school as well, and TV, is how to spot the good and the bad in terms of what they did. So I'd say for the effort and for the visual, and for the fact that this was 40 years before computers or 30 years before computers, and it wasn't made on a budget of 2 million or even 60 million. I have to give credit. The acting, but like I said, even in the 90s, they tried to do it with Xena and Hercules and Sinbad. And yeah, it might have been more modern, and they gave more female roles. But visually and set design and costume design, this movie actually did a better job than some of the stuff in the 90s, some of the TV shows in the 90s and things. So, you know, that's the other thing to remember, is that that's why you read and research and get exposed to a lot of things, so that when you do critique something, you know exactly what it is that was good and possibly bad.
Yeah. So what was the score then, Alex?
8. I said 8.
8.
Oh, 2
Well,
8 from us.
Guess what? Guess what I'm going to say. It's going to be an 8 from me, actually.
Oh, nice. We got 3 8s. That's 24.
We've got triple 8. Yeah, I agree with what everybody's. What Alex says, what Susan says. It's a fun movie. The acting there every now and again, but it doesn't take away from what you're watching, and it doesn't take away from the adventure, the scenery, the music. It's a fun movie. It's an 8 for a 79-year-old movie. You can't go wrong by sitting down and watching this. And I wish some of the movie companies these days would take something from this and make better movies that they are doing now. Mm. Because some of the movies what are released just lately in the past decade are not very good. So yeah, it's an 8 from me. So I'd like to thank this small group here, Susan, Alex, for talking about the Thief of Bagdad. Please, leave a comment below, give us a thumbs up, give us a thumbs down. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, wherever. We're on social media. You'll find us. If you want to join our groups, or you want to join our casts, leave a message or contact any of the group members you see in these videos. We'll pass messages on to the group leaders. So until next time, we'll be seeing you.
Even if we're blind.